Joining us now is David Weindorf, the Associate Dean of the College of Ag and Natural Resources at Texas Tech. And this is a really cool project that you guys are working on, a documentary film. And I guess let's start from the very beginning. Give everybody the title and the basic premise of this documentary that you're working on.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thanks for having me this morning. The name of the film is Between Earth and Sky, and essentially what it is it's a documentary film that explores the influence of climate change on Arctic soils and ecosystems up in northern Alaska. I've been going up there for the last dozen years or so, taking some students with me and participating in a course that's taught by the University of Alaska Fairbanks called the Arctic Soils Field Tour. And essentially it's 2 weeks of taking the students out in the field and digging down and looking at frozen soil features like permafrost and these thick organic layers and describing them because they're totally different than the types of soils we would see here in West Texas. So the idea was to kind of take this film and document those activities and then expand it by talking to a range of different scientists at different agencies, government agencies like the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and the National Park Service and those kinds of people, and basically take that entire story and try to get it out to a national audience.
Well, I've looked at, you've got a blog that people can go to. You want to give the address for that?
Oh, sure, you've got it up in front of you there. Go ahead and read it.
It's Between Earth and Sky blog.tumblr.
.com. And you have to make sure you have the word blog in your URL.
Right.
So
and Tumblr does not have an E.
Yeah, so Between Earth and Sky blog.tumblr TUMBLR.com.
That's it. Yeah, so we've got a lot of photos up there.
Beautiful
and some
pictures.
Yeah, and some video content. We had a lot of different opportunities to fly our little drone up there and get some aerial shots of some of the landscapes up there. Just beautiful photography along the Beaufort Sea, right up at the northern tip of Alaska. We also booked some helicopter time to get out away from Dead Horse and Prudhoe Bay and actually get out on the Arctic coastline. And again, we had unprecedented access to visit some facilities like the Fox Permafrost Tunnel, which is a research facility used by researchers from all over the world to essentially look at these frozen soils and the ice and the permafrost from the inside out. It's this big tunnel that goes down into the side of the earth, and literally you walk in there. The whole facility is kept below freezing, so you put on these heavy coats, and you walk in there and you can look at the morphology of the ice, these big flows of ice that are still frozen underground. They've taken radiocarbon dates of some bones and things that have found in there, and found bones that are 10,000 years old, for instance, and organic matter from frozen lakes and things from years ago. So really fascinating.
Yeah. What are some of the things that you did see in your and will be documented in the film involving climate change and what it's doing up there?
I mean, I think the key premise is we've talked to a lot of scientists as part of the film. Again, Army Corps of Engineers, Park Service, Bureau of Land Management, different scientists at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, and they all realize from a scientific standpoint that the Earth is changing and it is warming up. But in addition to that scientific evidence, one of the really great components of the film is we talk to just common folks, the old-timer at the coffee shop who's lived up in Alaska his entire life. We've talked to farmers and ranchers who've been up there, and talked to a bison farmer. And this bison farmer was telling us, for instance, when he was a young boy, in Alaska, they cancel school when the temperature gets to 40 below zero. That's when they get to
40
stay.
below?
40 below zero. So if you got any kids listening out there, you've got it pretty easy in
Wow.
Lubbock, Texas, right? But so he said when he was a young man and the temperature got 40 below zero, he can remember being home for weeks at a time and having school canceled. And now that he's a father and he's sending his young kids to school, every year they might get 1 or 2 canceled days when the weather gets that cold. So the interesting thing is we have all the scientific evidence, and that's out there. It's been published by all these agencies. But to talk to people who have those kind of personal experiences and have just been around it and kind of experienced it from that personal standpoint, it's a really fascinating aspect of the film. And we hope to use those people's experiences, those personal experiences, to kind of help explain the science of what's going on.
Right. Now, off mic, you were telling me about some erosion that's going on.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So what you'll see in northern Alaska are these ice wedges, and there's huge slabs of ice underneath the earth. And essentially what happens is as this ice melts, there's a large section of soil above that essentially just slumps off into the Beaufort Sea. And as you look along the northern coastline, that area is cutting back into the earth at a rate of 15 feet per year. So we're losing 15 feet of land surface all the way across the northern slope of Alaska, which is 600 or 700 miles, and it literally just slumps right off into the Arctic Sea. So it's amazing to see that, and that just gives you an idea of what the impacts are of this melting of the ice underneath.
Now, with some of the scientists you talk to and everything, I mean, that soil, that dirt, it has to go somewhere. Is that clumping up maybe a different part of one of the shorelines of Alaska, or going across the Bering Sea all the way to Russia or something?
Yeah, no, essentially once it makes its way into the sea, I mean, it kind of is dispersed by the currents and things that are there. Those large slabs of earth essentially break up, by erosion, and are kind of washed and degraded through microorganisms that are present in the sea. Another thing that you'll hear a lot of talk about is the disappearing sea ice in the Beaufort Sea itself. We got some aerial shots of that when we were on our helicopter. Let me pull a couple of those up for you to look at. But you can see that breaking up in the distance, and it used to be kind of like a solid ice pack all the way across the Beaufort Sea.
Wow.
And now it's just these isolated chunks, kind of floating here and there. And that's been a persistent theme over the last several decades.
So with everything that's happening as far as in that section of Alaska with the shoreline erosion and everything else, I mean, are there any structures or people currently in danger of, basically a mudslide or basically just losing their land? Or?
Yeah, that's a great question. In fact, that's a big concern for some of the native population along the western coast of Alaska. I think you'll recall a week or so ago, President Obama was up there actually touring some of those areas. But there are villages that are built right along the edge of the sea there. And as this coastal erosion occurs, they're losing structures that literally fall right off into the ocean. And they can try armoring the coastline with rocks and things like that, but it's very expensive to do that. And how many miles can you afford to do that? You can't do it for 600 miles, obviously. Right. It's just too expensive and too laborious to do. So they do what they can to protect these areas, but again, it's a big problem that they're dealing with.
Right now we're talking with David Weindorf, Associate Dean of College of Ag and Natural Resources at Texas Tech, as we're discussing the documentary that he's executive producing, Arctic Soils and Ecosystems. It'll air on PBS at some point in 2016 or 2017, and we'll get some additional details about the documentary here in just a moment. Rob Snyder filling in for Tom Collins today, along with Lauren Mack, as we're continuing our interview with David Weindorf, Associate Dean of the College of Ag and Natural Resources at Texas Tech. He's executive producing a documentary that will air on PBS nationally within the next 2 years, Arctic Soils and Ecosystems. By the way, if you follow the KFYO Twitter account at KFYO, we just posted a link to the Tumblr blog we were discussing last segment. So if you happen to have your cell phone nearby or your tablet or whatever, just get onto the KFYO Twitter account, and then you can click on the Tumblr link to see some of the photos that we've been discussing over the past segment. So, David, right quick, before we let the time escape from us, give everybody the specific details on the PBS aspect of your documentary.
Yeah, so the idea is Texas Tech Public Media is producing the film for us, and Paul Hunton and his staff over at the TV station here in town did a great job of coming up and actually capturing the videography of all this and conducting the interviews. The film itself is being shot in a format called 4K, which is twice the resolution of high-definition television, so super crisp. We've got excellent aerial imagery that we're able to capture with the drones and the helicopter footage and those kinds of things. What they'll do is sew all of the content together into the film itself, and then they'll actually take that out to PBS. Our local station here, KTTZ, is our PBS affiliate here in town, but they've already been speaking with the folks nationally. The national PBS folks are very excited about the project, and they'll look for a time slot to air this on the national network in late 2016 or early 2017.
We'll have to have you back on when that happens, so you can let everybody know about that.
Absolutely. And we're also planning to release the film at a couple of film festivals. We'd like to submit it to Sundance as well as South by Southwest, and probably also screen it here locally at the Alamo Draft House and a few other independent theaters across Texas and across the United States. We're also talking in 2017 about a film tour where I would go out to some different colleges and universities across the U.S., screen the film for those students, and then have kind of a panel discussion about the making of the film, answering their questions about climate change or Arctic soils and ecosystems. So
Fascinating.
there's a great educational aspect to it as well, in addition to just bringing this, to the general public. And, that's one of the important features of this as well. We're wanting to bring these ecosystems and these types of issues to people in the lower 48, many of whom have never been to Alaska,
right,
or will never go to Alaska for that instance. And if they do go to Alaska, it might be on a tour bus or on a ship or something. They're not getting to see the wild wilderness portions where we are, where there's no electricity, no cell phone service for hundreds of miles. I mean, it's just wilderness, literally.
Now, did you end up going to the extreme northern end where Barrow is at all?
We were not up at Barrow, but we went all the way to Prudhoe Bay, which is where the oil field is, essentially, and that is right along the Beaufort Sea. That's as far north as you can go on the Dalton Highway. But we started down in Anchorage, went up through Talkeetna, up through Denali National Park, up to Fairbanks, from there up to Coldfoot, all the way up the Dalton Highway up into Dead Horse or Prudhoe Bay.
And if you're not familiar, Denali was what was Mount McKinley, which, of course, was renamed last week by the president.
Yeah, and it's funny, up in Alaska, everyone calls it Denali anyway. I mean,
Right.
there was nobody that called it Mount McKinley up there. So when I say Denali, that's just because I'm used to talking about it in those terms with folks up there.
Sure.
Right, but of course, Rand McNally and all those people got to update the atlas.
Exactly. Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
So what?
Well, that's fascinating work.
Yeah,
You've been
thank
busy this summer.
Exactly. I have. As get to go to all these cool places, literally cool. So, yeah.
I guess with our last few minutes, what was one of the biggest items of impact that you and your team saw for your latest trips?
I mean, it's really impressive to see the Matanuska Glacier. This is a glacier that's up the valley from Palmer, Alaska. And it's one of the few glaciers in the world that is accessible by road. So there's actually a highway that kind of goes right along the edge of the valley. So you can literally drive right up to it. And to just go up there and see this entire flow of ice coming down the valley and visualize and think about the power that is behind that. I mean, it takes these large slabs of rock and just grinds them up into gravel because of the weight and the force of this huge flow of ice, as it comes down the valley. It's really awe-inspiring to see something like that.
Now, does that glacier, with the winter and everything, does it reform? Does the size constantly change on it?
It does. I mean, in the winter, obviously things will freeze over. It won't be melting when it's 30 below zero out there. But the idea is, I often talk with people about this kind of being like your bank account. Are you putting more money in or are you taking more money out on average each month? And what you're looking at is what is the long-term cumulative effect. And what we see is the glaciers are retreating back up the valley. That is, they're losing more ice than they're accumulating each year.
David Weindorf with Texas Tech University, the Associate Dean, College of Ag and Natural Resources, who's executive producing the documentary Arctic Soils and Ecosystems that will appear on PBS. David, thanks for coming in today.
Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Looking forward to Between Earth and Sky.
Great. Thanks so much.